My friends, there is no greater journey in life than walking in step with the Almighty. And in this journey, one of the most significant decisions you will ever make is choosing the person who will walk beside you. But let me tell you today, this is not a choice we make alone. The Creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who formed you in your mother's womb, is also the one who has a divine plan for your heart. Many people rush into love searching frantically, believing they must find someone to complete them. But hear me, God is not in the business of hurried blessings. He is in the business of divine appointments. When he brings two people together, it is not by accident, but by purpose. The Lord himself said, "What God has joined together, let no man separate." So what must we do? First, we must trust in God's perfect time. The world tells us we are running out of time, that we must settle, that love is something we manufacture rather than receive. But God tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." He is working even when we cannot see it. Second, we must seek his will through prayer. Too often, we lean on our own understanding rather than on his wisdom. But the Bible says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." A relationship that begins in prayer will be sustained by grace. Third, we must prepare ourselves to be the right partner. The right relationship is not just about finding the right person. It is about becoming the person God has called us to be. If we desire a partner of faith, we must be people of faith. If we desire a love that endures, we must have hearts that forgive, serve, and cherish. And let me tell you, my friend, God will always confirm the right person through his word. Scripture gives us wisdom. It warns us against relationships built on lust and fleeting emotions, and it calls us toward a love that reflects Christ, sacrificial, patient, and kind. But beware. The enemy knows the value of a godly relationship, and he will send counterfeits to distract you. Not everyone who comes into your life is sent by God. Some are there to test you, others to grow you, but only one will be the one God has ordained for you. Discernment is key. So wait patiently, trust in the Lord, and do not settle for less than his best. Some of you have been waiting, wondering, asking, "Lord, when will my time come?" My friend, do not lose heart. If he has promised it, he will bring it to pass. When God brings two together, no force in hell can tear them apart. Let this be your assurance today. You do not have to chase love when you are walking in step with the one who is love. At the right time, in the right way, God will bring the right person into your life. And when he does, it will not be forced. It will be as natural as the sunrise, as peaceful as a still river, and as sure as the promises of God. So wait, trust, prepare. And when the time comes, you will know that it is not your own doing, but the Lord's. To him be the glory. The concept of perfect timing is something that many people struggle with, especially in the context of relationships. We live in an era of instant gratification where waiting is seen as a weakness, a sign of passivity, or even failure. But the truth is, the most meaningful and significant things in life cannot be rushed. They require a process, a structure, and an unfolding that happens over time. Relationships are no different. The idea that one should simply force an outcome, grasp at the first available option, or manipulate circumstances to achieve a desired result is not only misguided, it is dangerous. It leads to instability, regret, and ultimately suffering. One of the greatest mistakes people make in life is assuming they are in control of every detail, that they can will things into existence according to their preferred schedule. This is a deeply flawed notion built on an incomplete understanding of reality. You are not omniscient, nor are you capable of perceiving every possible consequence of your actions. What you desire today may not be what you truly need tomorrow. What you think is right for you at this moment may prove disastrous in the long run. The complexity of life is such that no single individual possesses the capacity to determine every variable at play. The arrogance of believing otherwise is in part why so many people find themselves entangled in relationships that bring them more harm than good. Now consider the alternative. Rather than forcing an outcome, rather than grasping desperately at something that may not be for you, what if you exercised patience? What if, instead of assuming that your immediate desires are the highest authority, you acknowledge that there may be a timing beyond your comprehension that is operating for your benefit? This does not mean that you do nothing. Quite the opposite. It means that you prepare yourself, you build yourself, you grow in wisdom so that when the right opportunity presents itself, you are ready. Think about it in terms of competence. If you are to be entrusted with something of great value, a job, a responsibility, an important role, there is an expectation that you will first develop the necessary skills to handle it. No one hires a doctor who hasn't studied medicine. No one places an untrained pilot in the cockpit of a plane. The idea that you should receive something simply because you want it without first ensuring that you are adequately prepared is absurd. Yet, this is precisely what people do with relationships. They demand love, commitment, and stability without first cultivating the qualities that make them capable of sustaining those very things. The reason timing is important is that it allows for this preparation. It allows you to develop the strength, resilience, and character necessary to handle the weight of a real partnership. A relationship is not just about feelings. It is about responsibility. It is about sacrifice. It is about commitment to another human being with all of their flaws, complexities, and struggles. If you are not prepared for that, then receiving the right person at the wrong time can be just as disastrous as being with the wrong person altogether. Furthermore, consider the sheer amount of suffering that comes from impatience. People settle. They lower their standards. They compromise on fundamental values. They ignore red flags because they fear being alone. They make emotional decisions that lead to long-term regret. This is not wisdom. This is not strength. This is fear masquerading as action. The ability to wait for the right thing at the right time requires courage. It requires discipline. It requires trust in something beyond yourself. But here's the crucial part. When the right time comes, you will know and you will be ready. The worst thing that can happen is to receive something you are unprepared to handle. If you rush into a relationship without the necessary maturity, you will sabotage it. You will undermine its stability. You will introduce chaos where there should be order. The tragedy is not in waiting too long. The tragedy is in moving too soon. So, what is the solution? You must become the kind of person who is capable of sustaining a meaningful relationship. You must develop competence in communication, in emotional regulation, in understanding the complexities of another human being. You must be someone who does not require validation from another person to feel whole. Because the moment you outsource your self-worth, you have already placed yourself in a position of weakness. A healthy relationship is not formed between two incomplete individuals seeking completion. It is formed between two individuals who have taken responsibility for their own growth and can therefore contribute to something greater than themselves. Life is structured in such a way that timing matters. The right thing at the wrong time is not a blessing, it is a burden. And the only way to ensure that you are in alignment with the right timing is to be disciplined enough to wait, to prepare, and to trust. This is not passivity. It is active engagement with reality. It is a recognition that true strength lies not in desperate action, but in calculated and patient preparation. You do not determine the seasons of your life, but you do determine how you respond to them. You do not get to dictate the exact moment when something meaningful will enter your life, but you do get to decide whether you will be ready for it when it does, and that is where your responsibility lies. The timing of your life is not random. It is not meaningless. There is an order to it, a structure, a sequence that you may not fully understand, but that is nevertheless working toward an end. The question is not whether something good is coming. The question is whether you will be ready when it arrives. The ability to seek guidance beyond oneself is a hallmark of wisdom. People often assume that they can navigate the complexities of relationships on their own. using nothing more than their feelings, instincts, or personal experiences as a compass. This assumption is not only misguided, but also dangerous. The human mind is fallible, prone to bias, clouded by emotions, and limited in its ability to predict long-term consequences. A person in the throes of passion or loneliness is not necessarily a person in the best position to make sound decisions about commitment. And yet, relationships are among the most significant and life-altering decisions a person can make. To take such a decision lightly, to approach it with nothing more than raw emotion, is to invite disaster. There is a reason why wisdom has been sought through prayer, meditation, and deep contemplation throughout history. It is because the individual, left entirely to their own devices, is susceptible to self-deception. People convince themselves that they have found the right person based on fleeting excitement or momentary chemistry, only to later realize that they ignored obvious warning signs. They make life-altering choices based on desire rather than discernment. The antidote to this era is the act of seeking something beyond oneself, something that is not easily swayed by emotion or immediate gratification. Prayer is an act of humility. It is an admission that you do not have all the answers, that your vision is limited, and that there are forces at play beyond your comprehension. It is a discipline that requires patience, self-reflection, and an openness to the possibility that what you want may not necessarily be what you need. This is difficult for many people to accept. The idea that something greater than them might direct the course of their life can be unsettling. It requires relinquishing control, and for some that is a terrifying thought. But the reality is, you were never in complete control to begin with. You do not control when or where you are born. You do not control the nature of the people you meet or the circumstances that shape you. What you do control, however, is your willingness to seek guidance, to align yourself with wisdom rather than arrogance. Consider what happens when people do not seek wisdom in their relationships. They follow impulses. They act on immediate desires. They mistake infatuation for compatibility. They assume that because something feels good in the moment, it must be right. And then they suffer the consequences. They find themselves in relationships that drain them rather than build them. They attach themselves to people who do not share their values, their purpose, or their vision for the future. And then they wonder why things fall apart. They wonder why, despite their best efforts, they keep encountering pain, betrayal, and disillusionment. The reason is simple. They entered into something without first seeking clarity. They acted in haste rather than wisdom. Now, consider the alternative. A person who actively seeks wisdom through prayer does not rush. They understand that timing matters. They understand that not every opportunity is meant to be seized. They ask for discernment. And as a result, they recognize when a relationship is built on a shaky foundation before it collapses beneath them. They see the difference between love and infatuation, between a genuine partnership and a temporary escape from loneliness. This kind of clarity is not accidental. It is cultivated. It is earned through discipline, patience, and a commitment to something greater than personal desire. Prayer is not about asking for an outcome and expecting it to be handed to you. It is not a transaction. It is a process of alignment. When you seek wisdom, you are not simply asking for what you want. You are asking to be shown what is right. And often, what is right is not immediately apparent. Sometimes it requires waiting longer than you would like. Sometimes it requires walking away from something that looks good on the surface, but is ultimately hollow. Sometimes it requires being alone for a season so that you do not settle for something that will cost you in the long run. A relationship that begins with wisdom stands on a foundation of strength. It is not built on fleeting emotions, but on shared purpose and deep understanding. A relationship that begins without wisdom, on the other hand, is like a house built on sand. It may stand for a while, but it cannot withstand the storms of life. And there will be storms. Every relationship will face trials, conflicts, and challenges. The difference between those that endure and those that crumble is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of a solid foundation. That foundation is built before the relationship even begins. It is built through patience, discernment, and the willingness to seek guidance beyond oneself. There is a reason why those who rush into relationships often find themselves repeating the same painful cycles. They move forward without stopping to ask whether the path they are on is the right one. They enter into commitments without questioning whether they are aligned in values, in vision, in purpose. And then they are surprised when things unravel. But it was never a mystery. It was always a matter of wisdom. Those who seek guidance before they act avoid unnecessary suffering. They do not need to learn every lesson the hard way. They do not need to experience heartbreak after heartbreak to understand what they should have known from the beginning. They move with intention. They are patient. And when the right relationship does come, they recognize it, not because they are lucky, but because they were prepared. Wisdom is not something you acquire overnight. It is something you cultivate through discipline, through humility, through seeking understanding beyond yourself. If you want a relationship that will last, do not rely on emotion alone. Do not rush into something simply because you are afraid of being alone. Instead, seek guidance, ask for clarity, wait for confirmation. The difference between a life filled with regret and a life filled with purpose often comes down to a single choice. The choice to seek wisdom before you act. People often believe that the key to a successful relationship is finding the right person. They assume that if they can just identify the ideal partner, the one who meets all their needs, shares their interests, and aligns with their vision for the future, then everything will fall into place. But this assumption is deeply flawed. It places the burden of fulfillment on another person rather than on oneself. It suggests that happiness is something that comes from the outside rather than something cultivated from within. And it ignores a fundamental truth about relationships. Before you can find the right partner, you must first become the right partner. This is not a comfortable idea. It is far easier to externalize the problem, to assume that the reason relationships fail is because of the inadequacy of others. People convince themselves that they just haven't met the right person yet, that their past relationships failed because of bad luck, or that their struggles in love are due to the faults of those they've been with. But rarely do people stop and ask themselves whether they were truly prepared for the kind of relationship they were seeking. Rarely do they reflect on their own shortcomings, their own unresolved issues, their own lack of discipline or emotional maturity. A relationship is not a prize that you earn simply by wanting it. It is not something that is owed to you. It is a responsibility, and responsibilities require preparation. If you wish to have a strong, stable, and fulfilling partnership, you must first ensure that you are strong, stable, and capable of fulfillment yourself. You must cultivate the qualities you seek in another person. You must embody the values you claim to prioritize. Imagine someone who desires a partner who is loyal, trustworthy, and emotionally mature. That is an admirable goal. But the question they must ask is this: am I those things myself? Am I someone who can be trusted, who follows through on commitments, who remains steady in times of difficulty? Or do I expect another person to compensate for my own weaknesses? If you are not the kind of person who can provide stability, then what makes you think you deserve stability from someone else? If you lack self-discipline, if you are emotionally erratic, if you struggle to communicate honestly, then how can you expect to build something meaningful with another person? People enter relationships believing that another person will somehow fix them, that love will magically solve their inner turmoil. This is a dangerous illusion. A relationship cannot make you whole. It cannot erase your flaws or compensate for your deficiencies. At best, it will expose them. If you are insecure, that insecurity will manifest in jealousy, in neediness, in an inability to trust. If you lack emotional regulation, you will bring chaos into your relationship. If you are self-centered, you will demand more than you give, and that imbalance will create resentment. The solution is not to search endlessly for the right person, hoping that they will complete you. The solution is to take responsibility for yourself. unprepared of thought and behavior. But the alternative is far worse: the discipline to confront uncomfortable truths unprepared and suffering the inevitable consequences. Consider what happens when two unprepared individuals attempt to build a life together. They are unstable from the beginning. They enter with unrealistic expectations, assuming that love alone will be enough to overcome their personal failings. But love is not enough if it is not accompanied by responsibility. They struggle with communication, not because they are incompatible, but because neither of them has ever developed the skills necessary for healthy dialogue. They fight over trivial matters, not because those matters are significant, but because unresolved insecurities distort their perception of reality. They demand from one another what neither of them is truly capable of providing. And in the end, the relationship collapses, not because they were destined to fail, but because they never did the work to ensure they could succeed. Contrast this with the relationship between two individuals who have taken the time to cultivate strength, wisdom, and discipline within themselves. They do not enter blindly hoping that things will work out by chance. They understand the weight of commitment. They recognize that a successful relationship is not about passive enjoyment, but about active effort. They are capable of withstanding challenges, not because they are perfect, but because they have built resilience. They can navigate conflict without resorting to manipulation. People often believe that love is primarily an emotional experience, something that happens to them, something that they fall into, something that comes and goes based on circumstances beyond their control. This is a dangerously incomplete perspective. Love is not merely an emotion. It is a responsibility. It is a commitment to another person that extends far beyond feelings, which are fleeting, unstable, and highly susceptible to external influences. If love were simply about how you feel at any given moment, then no relationship would survive the trials of life. The truth is that love, real love, is an act of will. It is a decision you make again and again to uphold the well-being of another person, even when it is difficult, inconvenient, or painful. This is not a pleasant idea for many people. They want to believe that love should always be effortless, that it should be free of struggle, that it should not require discipline or sacrifice. But this belief is not grounded in reality. Anything of great value demands effort. If you want to excel in your career, you must work diligently. If you want to be physically strong, you must train consistently. If you want to develop wisdom, you must study and reflect. Love is no different. If it is to be deep, meaningful, and lasting, then it must be cultivated intentionally. It must be protected. It must be treated as something precious, not something that is discarded the moment it becomes inconvenient. People who approach love as if it were purely emotional inevitably suffer because of it. They mistake passion for compatibility. They believe that the intensity of their feelings is an indicator of long-term potential. They assume that if something feels right in the moment, then it must be right in the grander scheme of things. And so they enter relationships recklessly, without regard for whether they are truly aligned in values and purpose, in their vision for the future. When the initial excitement fades, as it always does, they become disillusioned. They begin to question whether they ever truly loved their partner, when in reality what they loved was the feeling of being in love. They were never committed to the person. They were committed to the emotional high. And when that high inevitably wore off, they left, searching for the next rush of infatuation. But consider the alternative. Consider the kind of love that is built not on fleeting emotion, but on responsibility and discipline. This is the love that endures. It is not dependent on circumstances or moods. It does not waver when difficulties arise. It is rooted in something far deeper than attraction or pleasure. It is rooted in the decision to stand by another person, to work through conflicts rather than avoid them, to prioritize the well-being of the relationship even when it requires personal sacrifice. This is the love that lasts a lifetime, not because it is easy, but because it is strong. Relationships inevitably face hardship, There will be disagreements, disappointments, and moments of frustration. There will be days when your partner does not inspire feelings of passion in you, when the reality of life overshadows the romantic ideal you once held. If your love is based solely on how you feel, then those moments will destroy you. But if your love is based on responsibility, on commitment, on the deliberate choice to uphold what you have built, then no momentary struggle will be enough to break it. People must understand that love is not something that simply happens to them. It is something they participate in, something they cultivate, something they actively choose every day. To love another person is to take on the responsibility of contributing to their well-being. It is to serve them, to support them, to remain steadfast even when your own desires pull you in other directions. It is to recognize that true fulfillment in a relationship does not come from perpetual excitement or passion, but from the security and trust that only come when both individuals are fully committed to something greater than themselves. And this brings us to an essential point. Responsibility is what gives love meaning. If love required nothing of you, if it did not demand effort, sacrifice, or discipline, then it would be meaningless. The fact that love requires work is precisely what makes it valuable. It is the same principle that applies to any worthwhile pursuit in life. Anything that comes easily, anything that does not demand struggle, is cheap and disposable. But love, real love, is not cheap. It is something that must be earned, maintained, and honored. This is why those who are unwilling to take on the responsibility of love ultimately fail in relationships. They want the benefits of intimacy without the cost of commitment. They want companionship without accountability. They want the highs without the inevitable lows. But this is not love. This is selfishness disguised as romance. Love is not about what you can get from another person. It is about what you can give. It is about choosing to serve rather than to be served. It is about recognizing that your own desires and preferences are secondary to the health of the relationship as a whole. This is a difficult standard. It requires self-discipline. It requires emotional regulation. It requires an understanding that love is not always about happiness, but about growth. Sometimes love demands that you put aside your pride and seek reconciliation. Sometimes it requires that you endure discomfort for the sake of another. Sometimes it asks that you stay when every impulse tells you to leave. But in doing so, it grants something far more valuable than momentary pleasure. It grants depth, meaning, and true fulfillment. The greatest relationships are not those that never experience hardship. They are the ones in which both individuals are committed to overcoming hardship together. They are the relationships in which love is not dependent on transient emotions, but on the conscious decision to uphold something sacred. This is what makes a relationship unbreakable. Not luck, not passion, not even compatibility, but the willingness of both individuals to take responsibility for the love they share. If you want love that lasts, do not search for someone who will make you feel a certain way. Search for someone who understands that love is a responsibility. And most importantly, become the kind of person who is capable of upholding that responsibility yourself. Because love that is built on nothing more than emotion will inevitably collapse. But love that is built on commitment, discipline, and selfless devotion, that is the kind of love that endures. People often assume that when they meet the right person, everything will fall into place naturally. They believe that relationships, if they are truly meant to be, should be effortless, that understanding should come easily, that conflict should be rare, and that happiness should be constant. This is a naive and dangerous belief because it ignores one of the fundamental realities of human nature. People are deeply flawed, and bringing two flawed individuals together inevitably creates friction. The idea that a perfect relationship simply happens without effort, without struggle, without a conscious commitment to growth is a fantasy. The truth is, even the best relationships require work. They require negotiation. They require two people who are willing to engage in difficult conversations, who are willing to sacrifice their own comfort at times for the sake of something greater. A relationship is not simply about coexisting with another person. It is about learning to build a shared life, a common future, and a mutual understanding that strengthens over time. But that does not happen by accident. It happens when two people make the conscious decision to refine themselves, to sharpen one another like iron against iron, and to see conflict not as a sign of failure, but as an opportunity for transformation. Consider what happens when people assume that relationships should be effortless. The moment they encounter difficulty, they believe something is wrong. They think that disagreement is an indicator of incompatibility rather than an inevitable aspect of human interaction. They expect their partner to understand them intuitively without the need for explanation or clarification. And when that doesn't happen, when miscommunication arises, when differences in personality or experience lead to tension, they interpret it as a sign that the relationship is not meant to be. This mindset leads people to abandon relationships that could have been great simply because they were unwilling to engage in the necessary work to make them so. But what is the alternative? The alternative is recognizing that struggle is part of the process, that disagreements are an opportunity to refine the relationship rather than destroy it. It is understanding that love is not merely a feeling but a discipline, something that must be cultivated, protected, and actively maintained. People who approach relationships with this mindset do not run at the first sign of difficulty. They do not allow fleeting emotions to dictate the course of their commitment. Instead, they engage, they listen, they work to understand rather than simply to be understood. And in doing so, they create something far more valuable than fleeting passion. They create stability, depth, and a love that endures. There is a principle in psychology that suggests that true growth often comes from discomfort. This applies to relationships as much as it does to individual development. If you avoid every difficult conversation, if you retreat at the first sign of tension, then you never truly grow. You remain in a state of immaturity, incapable of handling the weight of real commitment. The greatest relationships are forged in the fire of struggle. They are strengthened through the process of overcoming adversity together, of choosing to remain steadfast even when emotions waver. This is a crucial distinction to understand. Love is not about finding someone who makes you happy all the time. It is about finding someone with whom you can navigate the inevitable challenges of life. The person who will stand by you when things are difficult. The person who will challenge you when you are wrong. The person who will push you to become better, rather than simply making you feel comfortable. This is why relationships that are built purely on attraction or surface-level compatibility often fail. Attraction fades. Comfort can lead to stagnation. But a relationship that is built on mutual growth, on the willingness of both people to challenge and refine one another, that is a relationship that lasts. But in order to have that kind of relationship, you must be willing to accept the reality that struggle is not the enemy. Many people go into relationships with an unrealistic expectation that things should always be easy, and when they are not, they blame their partner. They assume that if things were difficult, then they must have chosen the wrong person. But often the real problem is that they have not yet developed the maturity to navigate the natural struggles that come with commitment. They expect love to be given without effort, when in reality, love is something that must be earned through continuous sacrifice and devotion. A strong relationship is not one without conflict. It is one in which conflict is managed with wisdom, patience, and respect. It is one where both people understand that difficulties are not an indication that something is broken, but rather that something is being built. It is one where struggles are met with problem solving rather than avoidance, where challenges are seen as opportunities to deepen trust rather than as reasons to give up. People must rid themselves of the idea that they will one day meet someone with whom everything is effortless. That person does not exist. Every relationship, no matter how well matched the individuals are, will face moments of frustration, misunderstanding, and difficulty. The difference between those that fail and those that succeed is not the presence or absence of struggle. It is the willingness to work through it. And so the question is not whether your relationship will face difficulty. It will. The question is whether you are prepared to face that difficulty with responsibility rather than resentment. Whether you will see struggle as a sign to run or as an invitation to grow. Whether you will demand perfection or whether you will embrace the messy, challenging, and deeply rewarding process of building something that truly lasts. The relationships that endure are not those that were free of struggle, but those that withstood it. And if you want that kind of relationship, then you must be willing to do the work, not just to find the right person, but to become the kind of person who can navigate struggle with strength, patience, and love. Because in the end, love is not about avoiding difficulty. It is about facing it together